Good afternoon. My name is Mike Rosenberg. I'm a professor of strategy at IESE Business School. Welcome to the session. As you've been following, this is part of a series of webinars we've been doing on how to deal with the current situation, both SARS-CoV-2, the virus, the COVID-19 disease that it's caused, and the economic disaster that it's caused in many parts of the world as public health officials do what they can to stem the spread of the virus. This program, we have two very special guests. We have Frederic Sabrià, who is a professor for 33 years here at IESE Business School in the operations area. Frederic was a Fulbright scholar. He has a master's degree in engineering, a PhD from the University of California at Berkeley, and he's been teaching here in operations and has many, many roles in the school. Now, Frederic was also on the Spanish Olympic water polo team. So part of what he's going to bring to the story today is kind of water polo and elite sports at the Olympic level and what that means. And I think your team took fourth in the Olympics in 1980.
Yes.
Yeah, but that was 40 years ago.
That was 40 years ago.
I guess you were younger then, right?
Yes.
Well, welcome to the session, Betty. Our other guest today is Fred Krawchuk, Colonel Fred Krawchuk or Professor Fred Krawchuk, depending upon your point of view. Has spent 25 years in the U.S. Army Special Forces, working all over the world in 30 different countries, including very complicated environments in places like Iraq and Afghanistan. He has been a student of the IESE Business School. He did his master's degree here. Then he came back and was an associate professor at IESE for a number of years. He's still a lecturer on our programs and spends most of his time today working with CEOs, with generals, with ambassadors and admirals on how they can manage what you might call a VUCA world, a VUCA, meaning a world which is volatile, uncertain, complex,
and ambiguous.
Thank you, Freddy. I think I would have gotten there anyway. But anyway, if you're watching this, we're broadcasting live on LinkedIn, on IESE's LinkedIn site. We're also on La Vanguardia and also on IESE's YouTube channel. As those of you who have seen these broadcasts before, all of this is going to be recorded, so you can watch it later. You can send it to your friends. And we've also enabled the chat feature, and we would encourage you to use the chat feature both to talk to other people on the call, but also to ask us questions. I have prepared a number of questions for Fred and for Fede. But if you do type your questions into the chat function, one of my colleagues will magically make those questions go from the chat onto the machine I have in my hands, so I'll be able to ask them your questions. And really our goal is to get as much ground covered as we can. Before we get into this whole VUCA thing, gentlemen, we're in the middle of this crisis, this crisis caused by a virus, compounded or maybe made better by some of the measures taken to control the virus. Now, Fede, here in Spain, we went into the state of alarm back in March. We're now in phase 2, so you and I are back in the studio. I've been doing many of these broadcasts from my house. What's your view, from an operations and a crisis management perspective of how this has gone in Spain, and do you think that the government has done a good job?
Well, first, before answering your question, just tell it, share with our audience this idea that both Fred and me, we can bring some ideas to the table, but that we don't mean by that to say that business is a game or that business is a war. So what we have learned in our trades will have to be taken with a grain of salt. Okay, so from that point of view, my first reflection with respect on how the crisis was managed in Spain, I would want to say is that this crisis for me is not really VUCA. It could have been much worse, in the sense that we are all fighting a virus, but that this virus is not an adversary that is going to be deliberately taking action against you.
Yes, the virus is kind of stupid. I mean,
it's stupid. Okay,
it does what it does, but we don't.
So from that point of view, the virus is going to generate much less mess that, I don't know, the Soviet water polo team. The Soviet water polo team is going to be a tough contender. Okay,
I'll ask you about water polo in a minute.
Okay, so as for how, well, first, just to say is that I'm not a special least in public health. This is number one. Number two, in this sort of situation, I think it's very difficult to say that if you have done or not a good job. So I think it's a characteristic of a VUCA environment. And I think that Fred might be able to say or enrich that vision, because it's very different to be fighting Second World War and you enter in Berlin and you put your flag. And if you are dealing with a messy environment with Al-Qaeda or whatever. So now in the case of Spain, I think is that unfortunately we have a weak government. Number two, I think that our public health system was underfunded. I think that the system was on the top of it, or is operated through multiple governments, regional governments, and there was a lack of trust. So there and so we didn't approach it in the best position. Okay, now as on the very top is Mr. Sanchez, somebody that can be compared to Winston Churchill or Martin Luther King, or some leaders that have been managing very, very volatile, and I don't think that either. But all in all, my feeling is that we have done a pretty good job.
I mean, the good news is we're down to dozens of cases a day in Spain, and kind of the runaway crisis is over. The hospitals are back under control. I was talking to a doctor the other day. I said, "How are things going?" He said, "Better." And I think that kind of says it all. Now, Fred, in the U.S., I mean, there's almost 2 million cases. I checked the numbers this morning. About a quarter of the world's total, a similar percentage of the world's death. And now you live in Colorado. I think you're in Arlington, Virginia, just outside of Washington today. Those places are different than New York City, where my oldest daughter lives, which has been quite hard hit. What's your view of the U.S. situation, and kind of how it's been managed from a regional or a central government point of view, and what's your view?
No, thanks for the question, Mike, and it's great to be with you and Fede, and thank you so much to everyone participating today. Appreciate your time and attention. In those like detective or police shows where the detectives will come to the scene of a crime, and then they'll spray a chemical, and then they'll bring a light in to illuminate the evidence. I think for me, what this ongoing crisis has been showing, it's really illuminating some of the structures that are both working and the things that are not working have become obsolete and really need serious attention. And so I'm seeing both the good, bad, and the ugly, and especially in the response. And I think from a business perspective, there's some great examples of people in spite of the mess. So for example, in spite of the mess, figuring out something to do. So for example, there's a pizzeria in Chicago here in the United States that, like many restaurants and retail, suffering these last few months. But one of the workers there figured out that their oven that they use for, one of their ovens that they use for making pizzas, could get hot enough, and they started experimenting, and they actually started producing the face masks for hospital workers. And so I think for me, yeah, there's good things and bad things happening at a variety of different levels in our collective response. And yet people are looking to see what do they care about, what's needed, and repurposing the things that work in order to take care of needs. So I like to focus on what's possible and rolling up my sleeves to help people get things addressed in spite of all the problems and setbacks.
Thank you, Fred. Now, Fred, in a recent article that you and a colleague published on the link between kind of special forces and running businesses in the Harvard Business Review, I think you talked about General Shoemaker, one of your mentors or something, because I don't know if you had him when you were at West Point, but General Shoemaker made the point that in complicated situations, we need to see the world as it really is, not how we would like it to be. Now, my question is, how do you do that, especially when reality is murky anyway, when it's not clear what's happening, when the data is inconclusive or not complete or not even reliable. And every time I read something, it seems somebody else has a very, very clear idea of something which is not necessarily true. So how do you see the world as it is if you don't know what the world looks like? How do you manage that?
No, super question, Mike. And I would agree. Clausewitz, one of the sort of writers, thinkers about combat war, would talk about war, the fog of war. So I think a lot of us, business with our families, etc., we're dealing with a lot of cloudiness, foggy situation, absolutely. And so I think I would say two things in response to that. It's appreciating that things are not, they are uncertain. It is foggy. So it's like stepping in the fog, step by step. That's sometimes the best we can do, and being okay with that. And so I think for business executives, it's really about how am I making sense of the situation in order to take the best action. So my first idea would be, what are executives seeing? What's the information that's available to them? Number two, what are they analyzing or getting reports done for them? And three, what information are they using to take action, make decisions? And make sure that you've got systems or way to do that. And making sure that there's diversity in your sources of information, who you're relating to. I mean, I was in Afghanistan, for example, and I was basically the equivalent of a vice president for strategy and innovation for a 10,000 person organization. And even though it was a military organization, on my initiatives team, I had a psychologist, I had a cultural anthropologist, I had an Afghan American political scientist, along with military people, intelligence people, in order to make the best of that cloudiness so that we could take action. And the second point I would make, it's about running multiple parallel safe to fail experiments, because we don't have all the information we need. And I don't think we often will in these challenging, uncertain environments. And so it's like probing to figure things out step by step to figure out, are there new alternatives? Meanwhile, you're running your day-to-day operations. So
safe to fail experiments. What's a safe to fail experiment? Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, sure. I think for any organization, you have your daily requirements, your daily operations, those things you really cannot afford to disrupt. But then spending a little bit of time, having a couple of people dedicated at running, what I say, low risk experiments that don't require a lot of investment, to try out what's possible. What are other alternatives we should trying out? Like the pizza folks in Chicago, they didn't stop making pizzas, but they started experimenting. Can we make the mass? And reiterating until they had something that they could sell successfully to hospitals. So it's finding ways to repurpose what you're already doing well in low cost, low risk ways to see if there's other alternatives available to you.
Fede, similar question. Now, I've watched water polo. I think I tried to play it once and I got exhausted after about 30 seconds. It looks like pure chaos to me. You're playing the Russians, in the Olympics. How do you even know what's going on in the pool? And, how does the captain tell the other guy what to do? Because everything's, underwater. And
well,
how do you manage that?
Okay. The first thing I think is that you don't manage a situation like this. So you operate in a situation like this. You cannot manage it. Okay. So it's very different. Water polo and other sports are very different, for example, from swimming. So in swimming, it's predictable. If you are the coach of a given swimmer, you can tell where is that your guy is going to be in 20 seconds seconds in the future. Now, if you play water polo, you are going to shoot, and you don't want the goalie in the other that is going to be facing you to even predict where you are going to shoot, because if he can know you are dead, he's going to stop. So I think it's very important is not only how do we cope with the mess, but in many situations is how do we generate more mess. the more mess, the better. So that's I think it's a very important.
You once told me about your goalie and the Italian guy. Can you
Okay.
tell that story? It's a great story.
So now in 1973, there was the first World Championships in Belgrade, and I didn't participate, but there were these guys that were there were our heroes, and Spain was not a very good team at the time, and in fact they were playing against Italy, the Sette Bello they call it, much stronger team, and they were losing big time. And so at a given moment, the Italians made a mistake. There was a counterattack by the Spanish, and one of their players, a guy called Alessandro, didn't even bother to go down to help his colleagues. And Spain attacked, and they missed it. So they sent the ball back to Alessandro, who was then alone in front of Paco Castillo, that was the Spanish goalie and our goalie in the club. And suddenly, if you can put there was this big shout by D'Alessandro saying "Castillo, cosa fai?" with something in between. And basically, what had happened was that Castillo had taken the whole goalie underwater.
He had
The whole goal. He had pulled the whole net down underwater. So there was no net, and nobody had thought in the rules of water polo that this could be done. So D'Alessandro didn't know what to do. The referees didn't know what to do. They gave a penalty kick. Well, it's much easier to confront a penalty that D'Alessandro alone. Well, they managed to they changed the rules that evening. Okay, so now you are expelled if you are a goalie and you do that. But this is the sort of things that we value in water polo more than winning a world championship. It's like managing to have the Italians disoriented, to get D'Alessandro saying "cosa fai." This is the best thing that can happen to you. And I think that many businesses are in fact out there trying to do that. And this is the sort of thing the virus didn't do it to us. The virus was not actively pursuing this unbalancing us.
Well, the virus might not have, but some of the measures that the world has taken to control the virus has thrown a lot of companies for a loop. Fred, on this issue of surprise, the goalie pulling the net underwater, you must have seen lots and lots of examples like that, where someone's just not playing by the rules, doing the unexpected. Any reflections on that? Is that part of this VUCA environment?
Yeah, absolutely. I think some of the tenets for my previous profession were all about speed, all about audacity, all about taking the initiative. As a matter of fact, John Boyd, famous Air Force pilot, created this idea of what's called an OODA loop. OODA loop meaning observe your environment, orient, get situated, decide, and act. And like Freddy was saying in the water polo world, same thing. This idea that you wanted to be able to run through the OODA loop as a unit faster than the competition. And evidence shows if you're able to observe, orient, decide, and act quicker than your enemy, you're going to win in battle.
Now, in this fog of war, in this situation, what role does delegation play? Because in your article, Fred, you talked about commander intent and this idea of delegating to people and letting them kind of get on with it. And I think the American military learned a lot of lessons from Vietnam and applied them in Iraq, which is about, you've got to let the guys on the ground get on with things. I think in this crisis, some political leaders have tried to let local people get on with stuff, and in some cases it's worked. In some cases they've kind of second guessed them or whatever. I'm not going to get into American politics because this isn't the place. But how does delegation work in this situation, in this environment?
Sure. I think for any manager, whether you're in government, military, business, it's trying to find the ideal sweet spot between what I would call alignment and autonomy. And alignment, that really can be like top-down, senior leaders involved, alignment around what's the shared purpose, what does success look like for our organization and get real clarity about that, as well as clarity around the tasks or the priorities. In other words, the why of an organization and the what are we all about? So getting that clarity and clearly communicating that throughout your organization really helps align everyone, literally get everybody on the same sheet of music. And then allowing the people who are going to be implementing autonomy, freedom of action. If they understand the intent of the leadership and it's clear what resources they have, sort of their left and right limits, any constraints in terms of budget, etc., then people can quickly act, take initiative for that. And so, yeah, leaders are really providing that pathway, clarity around what does success look like, as well as should we quit? What is abort criteria so that we don't waste time if things aren't going to work out, and allowing people to bring their passion and skill set to take care of the shared mission for the organization.
Same question, because but both from Water Polo, but also from 33 years of teaching management in this institution.
Yeah.
Probably you picked up some things on this issue of delegation.
Yes. Now, in terms of from Water Polo, my worst kind of memory comes from being 20 and playing in Budapest, the European Junior Championship, and we were fantastic team, and we won all the matches, and the last one was against Germany, and we went into this fantastic pool. Hungary is like the capital of water polo. It's the country where they all play water polo, and we didn't belong there. Spain was not on the top, and we didn't belong, and so we arrived there, and I was next to the Spanish coach, and there was this guy that arrived and said, "Could you please come before playing the Germans last match? Could you please come and check if we have the right idiom?"
The right what?
The Spanish idiom, because you are going to win.
Oh, the right song.
Song.
The right song. The anthem. The anthem. Yeah.
And is it? And I remember we were paralyzed, and our coach said, "You know, guys, you play the way you want," and we lost. Big time.
So they never had to play the anthem.
No. So it's a matter of delegation, but in there I learned it's very important that the people at the top just are clear on what is it that they want to share. They have to even be a little, how to say that? You should think a little like on a crazy objective. It has to be like a crazy objective, and you end up believing in it. Now you have to be well trained. You have to have the quality, but the people on the top in a VUCA environment have to know what the future is. You know better the future than the present in a VUCA environment. Because the future is what you want, and so that you know. Now, what you don't know is the present. The present is what you are saying. We're all in the water, and it's a mess, and I only can see a part of the thing. I'm, 50. My eyes are 50 centimeters or 30 centimeters over the water, and through training, I might be through training and knowing how we have to play, what we have said, where our objectives are, how we're going to play. I then manage to coordinate. But if you send me to the VUCA world without knowing where we are doing, how we are going to play, we are dead meat. We are dead meat.
Now, in during this crisis, some people have been watching some of the different webinars we've been doing. We've had different guests on this series, and we've also been doing some workshops with our dean and CEOs. One of the things which comes up again and again is how people like your pizza example, how individuals and organizations have come up with amazing ideas. And in one case, we had a CEO tell us how surprised he's been by some of the talent that he didn't even know he had. Is there a danger that at some point this thing will be passed and we'll kind of snap back to our old command and control model, and we'll kind of lose some of the good stuff that have come out of this crisis, this working online, trusting people, this kind of thing? Is there a danger of that?
Well, if I take my example on sports, if you have been, and many companies have been, a company of swimmers, so a company that look for efficiencies, it's going to be very difficult for you to go through a crisis that is not interested. Where the important thing is not to be efficient, but to cope.
Well, you've been teaching for 33 years.
Yeah,
how
the
to be
wrong
more
thing.
efficient.
Yes.
All
Yes.
of operations management is about.
Yes, I think that
and
we are not doing a good job. That's one of the discussions in the department right now. and Fred came to IESE, in fact, to help us, kind of change this sort of orientation. It's true that for many businesses, efficiency is the name of the game. But many others, especially those that are innovating, this is not the thing. It's efficacy. It's like try to find what is the right thing to do, and you're going to do that, but making tons of mistakes. You try to protect yourself through quality, through quick prototyping. So there are ways in order you are not trying to not to get hurt too bad. But it's very different to swim or to play water polo. Now, to your questions, I think that unfortunately many of the companies that have been confronting the virus today will little by little come back to the operation as usual.
Well, Fred, I know you're doing some interesting work with CEOs. I think a couple of financial services companies and stuff like that. What's your view? Are they going to rebuild their corporate culture or the way they take decisions as a result of this thing and move to a new normal? Or do you think there's a danger or maybe they'll slide back to the way things used to be?
Sure. No, I think there's always that danger because, again, in this great uncertainty, we're looking for things that we can sort of get grounded in. So I think the tension between efficient, being effective, efficient is a key one. What I'm encouraging the people I'm working with is anyone in the organization observing, collecting what the military would call lessons learned? What are the things that are literally working? You're trying new things, what's working, and identifying, capturing the things that are not working, the things that are becoming obsolete, and making sure somebody's responsible for sort of sensing inside the organization for those lessons and keeping the leaders informed of that, so that as we progress through the next several months, we really try to capture best practices and let go of the things that no longer serve us. But someone's got to be responsible for that, and leaders have to be interested in hearing those stories from the front line, so to speak.
Now, I'm starting to get some interesting questions coming in from our audience. We have many people online watching the broadcast on LinkedIn, also on YouTube, and also on La Vanguardia. Let me just stick with you, Fred. Mark's asking if you think big companies are really prepared for an uncertain environment, and if they're still not. What do you think? Are big companies prepared for this kind of new normal, which is uncertain, volatile, ambiguous, and complex?
Well, my response is we don't have a choice. This is our reality, whether we like it or not. Back to the General Schoolmaker quote, what is the situation as is? Doesn't mean we have to like it, and it can be incredibly uncomfortable. And so that is what we have. And I have been inspired by people who are comfortable with that and care enough to do something about it. So I think that for the organizations that are asking those questions, it's like really looking inside. Who are the people, and actively seeking out the people with the willingness, the competence to try out new things in service of the organization, of the community. So bottom line is, this is the current reality. And as another general used to say in special operations, General Wayne Downing used to say to us when we were deployed, adapt or die. So I think we've got some tough decisions to make, or we will lose.
Fede, 33 years teaching the wrong thing.
the
Do you
wrong
think
thing.
do you think big companies are ready for this environment that we seem to be in now? Or the managers that we've been training, are they ready?
I think some. I think some are. I think the difficulty, the most, many companies will have the problem of having like 80%, say number, so 80% of their business run on efficiency ground, and then with these efficiency objectives, and then they know they have to innovate. They have to be looking into the periphery. Now, how are they going to be able to mix those two? It's going to be difficult. But for example, things that I have taught, perhaps not to you because you had already finished the MBA when I started here, but probably poor Fred was one. I remember teaching, talking about the Toyota production system. This idea is that we make a mistake and then we stop and then we look at the mistake and we look for the root cause and we try to solve. Now, when I was a kid, I was playing in a training session, and suddenly because you swim with your head out, I just got water, and I was kind of suffocating, and I stopped. And the guy that was defending me, which was a guy that had been in the Olympics, grabbed me by the cap and pushed me underwater, and I was suffocating. Took me out, and he told me, "You never stop. You never stop." So there is a mistake. You keep going, guy. You keep going. In this environment, you adapt, you focus, you don't learn if you want. You learn differently.
No, Petty, you talked about the future. You talked about knowing the future and not knowing the present. Lorenzo is asking, how can you even guess what the future is going to be in a VUCA environment?
Well, you are in 1978 in an old swimming pool here in Barcelona, and a young new national coach come to you and says, our objective is to win the gold medal. And you 15 guys playing water polo in Spain seriously, and we were saying, this guy is nuts. Okay, we finished fourth, but 16 years later, Spain won the gold medal. But this was because there was somebody that was there, that was focused, that was a whole team. We were also, and this is very important in VUCA, you have to get lucky. Luck is fundamental. Okay, you have to get lucky, but you need to create your future.
The vision.
It's a vision, yeah.
Fred, would you agree with that? In some of the environments that you've been in, is it about creating a vision, or is it just about kind of coping through, muddling through and coping?
No, I agree with Fede. And from the military perspective, we would always, and it's actually something I do now with business executives, to create that vision is like inviting people in the organization to get creative and do, no kidding, scenario planning. So a quick tip, an exercise you can do with your teams, with your organization, is think about what I like to call the heaven scenario and the hell scenario. Look ahead as far as you want, 6 months, a year, 2 years, whatever. For your organization, what would the ideal look like? But don't plan from today forward, plan from the back. From your ideal future, using your imagination and smart people on your team, walk backwards. What were the steps you took in order to get to that future? But also being really practical, what is the worst outcome you can imagine over the near future? And then backward plan, what were the steps you made that led to that? And just to get people to start thinking about, like, literally new maps. What is that vision? What's the pathway? And look at worst and best outcomes. And again, iterate, do some experiments, move in the direction you want to move. But you got to move. You got to move.
I think there is another point related to what Fred was saying, is that your company, your team, your army, you need to generate new repertoires. So don't go into a VUCA world by just repeating, making yourself predictable. So you want to make things difficult for the other. So you want to be unpredictable in a way. So bring in new people into the team, bring in new expertise, okay, enrich the environment with new repertoires. And I don't know, I saw a movie a few days ago during the pandemic, and you could see, for example, the Soviet ice hockey team training with Bolshoi theater in order to, get more flexibility. Well, I don't know, I know nothing about the hockey, no, but so there is this idea of bring even crazy idea, new ways to look. And by the way, Mike, this is one of the difficulties that we're going to have here in business schools. Okay, so how do we reinvent the way we teach? Okay, and what is the new expertise and the new ways of understanding life or business life? How do we do that?
Sure, because we've had this hyper specialization, which is just the opposite of systems thinking.
Not only this, and that we hate to fail. We hate to fail, and we need to fail. It's going to be very difficult to reinvent ourselves if we don't fail.
I don't know, Fed, you spent a few years here full time, and you're still an adjunct professor here at IESE Business School. Did you agree with Fetty that we have to kind of reinvent the way we do business?
Well, again, I would look at what it's not in the phrase we use here in the United States sometimes, it's not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, right? It's like, what's working, like getting really clear. What's working, those things you want to sustain, given new environments, new challenges, what are things you want to experiment with to try out, so that whether it's a business, a university, you want to stay relevant and serve the needs of your constituents. And so I think it's a both and. Those things you need to do day to day to keep the organization running, and taking some risk, experimenting, trying new things out, and seeing what will serve. As a matter of fact, Mike, you remind me of a quote from General George Marshall, World War II extraordinaire, then became a Nobel Prize winner as our Secretary of State. When he went to the State Department, he started a new organization called the Policy Planning Staff, which is the forward-leaning, imaginative, creative folks that are looking ahead. And the reason he said that was, listen, I've got to have people that are paying attention to the current battles, the current operations, so to speak. But I also need people who are looking at the wisps of smoke arising on the horizon, so that we can anticipate, prepare for the future, at the same time looking really hard at past policies that do become obsolete. And we have to have the courage of letting go that which no longer serves us, and take some risks and explore what things do serve us.
No, neither one of you are epidemiologists. I want to get I want to try to get as many questions as I can, but there's a few questions on the current crisis and kind of the current situation, which I think I want to see if you want to address any of them. One is, what is really causing the uncertainty at this time? Is it the virus and its pattern, or is it the economic response to the virus, the economic impact of the response to the virus? And a related question is, are we ready for a second wave, and kind of maybe even the social unrest that might come with that? Some people see this whole the riots and the whole Black Lives Matter thing kind of the confluence of two things. One is we had the lockdown, which has not been fair. People of color, people with lower income levels have had a more difficult time than wealthier people. So there's a certain degree of pent up rage anyway, and then you get the murder of this guy Floyd. But are we ready for this thing, or is the uncertainty going to continue? Do you guys have any opinions of that?
I think that most of us we have been trained, and we are even comfortable to manage and to think linearly. So in this idea of there is a cause and an effect. Okay, now more and more, what we all know is that this is not the case. So in fact, we have circularities, and so that something affects, generates an effect, which creates another one, and we lose control.
This is complexity, right?
And that's the complexity part. Okay, so there is this. That's why I think it's a matter of don't try to manage it. So try perhaps first to live in it. So don't try to control the wave. Learn how to surf the wave. Okay.
Surf,
And now-
surf,
surf.
surf.
So
like a
so
surfer.
go
Yeah, yeah.
try and try to adapt.
Yeah.
And so are you going to be successful off the bat? No. Are we going to do a good job immediately? No, probably not. It's not water polo, but there is this tennis player, Stan Wawrinka. If you see him on TV, check if you see one of his matches, his left arm. On his left arm, he has a tattoo. And the tattoo is a verse from Samuel Beckett that says, ever tried, ever failed, no matter, try again, fail better. And so,
Is he right-handed or left-handed?
no, he's right-handed. But before serving, he is going to be looking at this. And this is the sort of attitude. Okay, it's not crazy. You have to fail better, learn from it, and fail better.
Fred, do you think the United States is ready for a second wave?
Well, I mean, ready or not, I think we ought to be prepared for that. And I do agree with Fede. It's so much about our mindset. And so there's a great quote from a famous boxer in the United States, Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson, super well trained, one of the historically top boxers in our boxing history. Anyway, Mike Tyson said, everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face. So I think that's relevant for us, right? Because I think there's always going to be some uncertainty, and we're not going to necessarily change that. And so what can we do, like Fede is saying, to prepare ourselves to be resilient? There's a great quote from Japanese martial arts: seven times down, 8 times up. So it's this idea that we are going to take hits, there are going to be setbacks, and we have to get up and keep striving forward. And so I wouldn't try to figure out the uncertainty or hope that it goes away. It's about what are we doing to rebuild into a more resilient future, so that we can take.
Fred,
Fred,
let me just stay with Fred, and I'll come back to you on that. On resilience, there's a specific question from one of our people watching the show on the role of the board and senior management in promoting resilience. Is this a CEO job, or is this the job of the board, or how do you see that from a governance point of view, Fred?
Well, I think it's a both and. I think it's about leadership by example with the board and CEOs, in the sense of, I think we all should be really actively interested in what's the well-being of our team, our employees, our communities, and actively doing things to make sure that we're taking care of people's feelings, strong emotions these days. And so I think it's leadership by example, both and more than just talking about it, but taking actions to help organizations become more resilient, as well as the individuals.
Fede, on resilience, what can companies do to become more resilient?
Well, I think there are many things. So one is investment. So I think you have to start forgetting partially this idea of efficiency and return on capital. So start building.
Well, that has to be the board. The board is.
That's it. That's what you were asking. So start funding projects that may not succeed. Okay. Start thinking not too much about your plan. Don't plan too much into the future. There is a, well, you'll know better. There is a Jewish old joke that says, how to make God laugh? Tell him about your plans. Okay. So don't tell him about your plans. Tell him about your dreams. Okay. And prepare your organization for your dream. Don't go into the details.
Here's a very specific question from one of the people watching the show, Fede. Will working from home be part of the new normal? What do you think?
I wouldn't like it. I wouldn't like it. I wouldn't like it. I wouldn't like it because, I love to think of work ambience that makes it attractive to be there sharing. So it's like, I don't know, it's like training alone. No, you don't train alone.
No, Fede, we don't have too much time, but someone's asking about, to you specifically, business leaders who have navigated through previous VUCA environments. And if I know you're going to talk about 9/11,
Well, yeah,
but not too long.
not too long. So for 9/11, there were several, no? So there was on the crisis, there was the Major Giuliani, that was one of the
Mayor Rudolph Giuliani, the mayor of New
okay.
York City. Yeah.
But just for the very first hours. But then there was the reconstruction, and on a very first phase, I think the Americans, New Yorkers, did a fantastic job, because they were able to organize through their Department of Construction a team that was working with 4 big construction companies that they trusted. And so they were able to manage an extremely complex project, and now I'm talking as a civil engineer, without very little planning, just coordination, every day. They were capable of managing and doing a very efficient, in fact, cleanup. Now later on, it became entangled in a whole issue of politics about the decision of what to build on that area, and that was not as effective.
Fred, Fede earlier, when we first started the session today, said that the field of the military operations and water polo is different than business. But what's the same? What's the same? What kind of big lessons that because you're 25 years of a decorated soldier, West Point, colonel in special forces, and now you're advising companies. What do you think is the same, and what lessons, kind of to start wrapping up the program here, what lessons do you think people can draw away from your experience, at least?
Sure. No, I do think the contexts are very different, right? The field of water polo, the field of battle, of course, very different contexts. But I think a lot of what we're talking about today in terms of successful principles are the same, or very similar. So I would say, as a quick sort of key takeaways for me from this conversation, one, I think what's applicable to all these VUCA situations is, one, all of us need to really sense our environment and make sure we're listening to diverse voices so that we can respond in the most appropriate way, and being smart about it, not putting all our eggs in one basket, but small bets, taking experiments to see what's working. So number 1, sense. Number 2, respond. Then 3, adapt. Actively have people, what's working, so that we can sustain a new practice. What's not working, and be real clear about that, because it's not supporting our mission, and letting go of it. But doing this sense, respond, and adapt with a real sense of care. I want to make sure that comes in. Like, we have to care about our people, and more than words and action. So how we trust people, where people can count on us, they can depend on us, so that they know we've got their back.
How important is trust in this whole story? Fede said earlier that he felt that there was not a lot of trust in the Spanish political system, because there isn't. How important is trust, Fred?
I think it's fundamental. General Mattis, who 4-star general and later became our Secretary of Defense, often said that operations occur at the speed of trust. And we, in the military, we have this saying, I've got your 6, meaning I've got your back. I can count on you. I can depend on you. You and I, we may not always get along. We may not even like each other, but we have a shared mission. And as a matter of fact, I'm talking to some leaders here on a project, and we were talking about, if you had to choose between character and competence, we would take character, because that's hard to train. Takes longer. You can train people. It's a both and, but I think if, especially in this day and age, we've got to show that we're reliable to each other.
Thank you so much. Fede, we got about a minute left. You said that water polo is different than business. What's the same?
But the same, I think it's the importance of quality, individual quality. I think it's the importance of team and the culture of the team, because if you have the team, you are predictable for your colleagues. Okay, so we can trust you because we have trained together, and I can predict how you are going to evolve. And finally, I think it's the same in the sense of having a common objective that allows both this alignment and this autonomy.
Frederic Sabrià, Fred Krawchuk, thank you so much for spending the time with
Pleasure.
us here this evening in Barcelona, this morning in Washington, D.C. It's the evening for those of us, for those people watching in Asia. It's getting late, so we do want to wrap this session up. Next Tuesday, we'll have a really exciting session for those of you who speak Spanish. We have the country manager for Google here in Spain. This is Fuencisla Clemaris. He's actually an associate professor at IESE Business School. And my friend and colleague, Julian Villanueva, we'll be talking to him about the new normal and the role that technology plays in that. Again, as always, we invite you to come back and rewatch this broadcast, send it to who you like. You've got all of it on iese.edu and as well as on our LinkedIn channel in La Vanguardia. Thank you very much and good evening.